What's going on, y'all? So in this video we're going to go ahead and rewire the cooling fans, add some off-road lights, and show you how I do it, adding a fuse block, breaker, and relay system. The previous owner wired the fan right off the battery with no fuses, and I'm not a fan of it. So let's go ahead and hop into that video and show you guys what we did. I'm going to apologize, some of it is a little hoppish. I kind of spaced here and there, got to working, and only recorded as I had free hands and free time. So here you go. Let me show you how I did the wiring. As I was saying, the previous owner put a switch in the ashtray for the fan for the transmission. Now that led to a problem, which is bare wires under the dash, and that is where I have an issue. We're going to go ahead and rewire this while putting in some off-road lights. But starting with this first, we need to figure out how he wired all this stuff up. It's always fun troubleshooting someone else's wiring. I don't know why you would leave so much slack in a harness and why you would destroy a ashtray. These are getting harder to come by. I do have a replacement. We're going to move the switch up to the dash. That way we don't have to do some hackery. Alright, so I tried to break the switch nut loose and it broke the whole switch. That's fine. We're going to redo this anyways. I guess we'll go ahead and pull the ashtray out. There's 4 screws here and on the other side, and then we'll see what he did with the wiring. So this wiring goes up under the dash to a ground bolt, and I can't really get to it, access to it here. There's all kinds of extra wiring. This guy has put backup cameras, all kinds of other crap in here that I don't feel like messing with today. So let me go ahead and show you guys the fan setup and what he did. We got, this is a ground wire. It runs all the way along the core support under the dash and then goes into the switch. And he ran the hot right off the battery. No fuse or anything. So there's nothing to prevent this thing from getting hot and burning up the wiring. Now we're going to go ahead and jump to the ashtray and show you some of the issues with the ashtray as well. Before I go ahead and go sort out this fan wiring, I got to pick up some switches and other things too. Looking at the ashtray, he just cut the wires and taped them up. I have a spare ashtray. I need to find the factory wires and we'll go ahead and fix this situation here. Alright, so here we have the wiring out. We have the old tray out right there. We're going to go put this new tray bolted in, and we're just going to butt connect the wiring back together. Not enough room for me to play with a soldering iron, and I don't want to melt my dash up, so make it easier. Alright, so here we have our bracket mounted in. We've got the hot and ground wire we need to extend, and then we can go ahead and put our ashtray back in place, and that'll button this up, and then we can start wiring up the lights and the transcooler fan. So here we have all our wiring buttoned up. We're going to go ahead and slide this back in the dash. This part of the wiring is done. We'll go ahead and take the dash panel off and figure out where we're putting our switches. Well, you guys, it's been a couple days since we got the dash put back together. We're going to go ahead and get back out here, get back into wiring up the fan and running wires for these off-road lights. I'm going to make a whole new fuse mount, run a relay, and I'll lay it out and show you guys. I went through digging through my parts bin and found a bunch of stuff I can use, so saves me a headache of having to try to sort things, buy things, and go that route. So let me go ahead and show you what we're doing, explain it, and then we'll show you how we're doing this and set it up. So here's the basic of our wiring for the transcooler fan and the off-road lights. I'm going to run a breaker instead of a fuse before this fuse block. So we'll have our battery come in, hook to here, and then comes out here and hooks to the fuse block. That way it does have a max power it can handle. This is a 100 amp breaker. This is rated for 100 amps. So if something goes wrong, this will trip and we can sort it out. Now this is a 6 fuse block, and I need 4 fuses to run the relay setup that I want. What I'm going to do is one relay gets direct power from the fuse block. That's its constant power. Then the switch power will come out of the fuse block to the dash, and that's 2 wires, 2 fuses. Then I'm going to mimic the same setup on this side and then run it to the dash, and that'll take up 4 of our slots. So that leaves me 2 open slots left. So if I want to add anything like a charging port or something, I can still put a fuse port on here and have space for it to grow. Now let's go under the hood and we'll show you the bracket I drew up to mount all this on and how we're going to secure it under the hood. Under the hood here, you guys can see we've got a bolt here and a bolt down there. That's what held our jack bracket in place. We no longer have an under hood mounted jack because it broke. So I'm going to repurpose the bolts to hold the bracket in place. It's just going to slide down on those 2 bolts like that. And then I will set up my relays, my fuse block, and my breaker all right there. We're going to use some 18 gauge sheet metal, cut it down to the shape we need it, and then bend it so we have a flange. And it should be strong enough to hold it all in place. Here's the bracket laid out on some sheet metal. We're going to go ahead and trace out the design. I need to make these notches skinnier and make sure I move them at the front here. The other thing I'm going to do is add a 1/2 inch to the front side here, so I could add a little bit of a flange to it so it can rest on the inner fender, so the bolts aren't doing all the bracket support. But you guys can also see breaker's going to go first, fuse box, and then the 2 relays I have. So we drilled 2 3/8 inch holes here and here. That way when we cut these, it'll have a nice rounded edge to it. I'm going to take my 4.5 inch cutting wheel, cut these open, and then we'll start cutting the outline. So here we have our basic shape cut out. I'm going to bend on this line, bend on this line. This is just because it doesn't need to be all that way, and I need some clearance underneath here. We're going to go get a grinding wheel out, clean the edges up, and then we'll get this clamped down and bent next. With the plate cut and ground down, what I did is took a piece of 1/4 inch thick angle and 2 big C clamps, clamped it between my workbench and the angle iron right on the line that needs to be bent. Now we'll go ahead and push this down and get it to bend the 90 we need, and then we'll flip it over and do this side as well. So once we get it close, we'll now smack it with a hammer to flatten it up as good as we can. And in my case, my C-clamp is in my way, so we'll move it just a hair. And this one clears. So now we've got our bend. We're going to try to flatten it a little more. And don't be afraid to hit it. There. Now we take our clamps loose. This is where I turned around the panel to start bending the other side so we can get a 90 to match. Well, we got the bracket in its test fit stage where it's bent, it's cut, it's shaped, it's ready to go ahead and put it in the Bronco. We're going to go ahead and drop it in, make sure it fits. The one thing I didn't count for was how hard or easy it's going to be to access these bolts once we get it finalized to secure it. So let's see how the fitment is. I'll worry about getting the bolts tight. It won't be that hard. It just take some finagling. Once it's in, don't plan on it coming back out. We have templates for the fuse block, templates for the breaker. Those holes will be drilled here in a minute. Let's show you how this fits. So here's our metal plate sitting in place. It's a little tight here, but this isn't going to be moving around, so it shouldn't have any clearance issues. Now I can go ahead and pull this back out, get the holes drilled for the fuse block and the relay, and then we should be able to paint this, and then we can start mocking up the wiring on there. Should be fairly straightforward from here on out. Here's how everything is laid out. Power in from the battery, power out through the breaker, into the fuse block. I'll have two wires here that run to the dash to supply hot power to my switches. I'll have two wires here that stay constant hot for the relays and they're fused. We'll have switch power come back out, hook to the relays, and then run to the front of the vehicle. All grounds will come here and be terminated here. Plain and simple. I have templates made, so we'll go ahead and mark these and then drill them out. The plan is to mock and test several times so I have everything laid out exactly in the place it needs to be. Starting with my template for my breaker, I'll mark the two drill holes. We're going to use M6 Allen head bolts to hold it in place. We'll get that sitting, then we'll lay our template back out for the fuse block and then redo these, both relays. Relays mounted loosely, just sitting there with the bolts holding it in place. I've got the 4 holes marked for the fuse block, so we'll drill those next, and then we can go ahead and mark the 2 relay spots. Here we have the fuse block done now. Now I can lay out the relays, get them where I need them, and then drill the holes out. Relays are going to sit right about here, just as I'm holding it. There'll be 2 more 1/4-inch holes, and then I can throw down some M6 Allen heads to match the breaker. Here's the bracket all drilled out. We're going to scuff this up and paint it with some matte black chassis paint. Then we can bolt everything down for good and start routing our wires on here, and then we can drop this in the truck and start running wires front and rear. So here we have our lugs. We're just going to want to make a short little jumper cable between the two, and then we'll cut this down to size here, then we'll strip it, and then we'll put this in a crimper and have our little jumper wire made. So this is one of the wires I messed up. I just wanted to show you how we crimped it. All you do is slide the terminal end on, then you set it in this little holder. This will work for 0 to 8 gauge, and you just hammer this down and it crimps it. I've used this before, just a little rusty. Coming over to our fuse block, we're going to have red going to the fan or the off-road lights. White will be our switch power. Blue is our constant hot, and black is our ground. So we'll run the black to the ground strap here, blue to the fuse side here, and then we can get this in the truck, mount it up, and start running wires. Here's all the accessory wiring ready to mount into the truck. We have hot wire going to a fuse link, grounds going to the relays. We'll get it mounted. We'll figure out how we want to run this ground, and then we need to make some connections here and here to go to my switches inside the cab that I still have to mount. Then we have to come out hot switch wires that way to excite the relays, and then these 2 will go to the front of the truck. Well, you guys, this is one of the reasons why it takes me a little longer to get things done. My wife started feeding these little squirrels, And currently we don't have a tray of peanuts out for him or food out for him. So he comes looking to me when I'm out in the driveway like, excuse me, sir, there isn't any food out there. So here I am, my bag of peanuts, waiting on him to eat his peanuts and let me know when he's done eating. Alright, enough squirreling around. Now that I've given the squirrel his peanuts, we'll go ahead and get back on this wiring, show you what we've got done and where we need to go from here. Brackets secure. Now we got to hook up the ground on the fan wire, and we have to hook up the hot wire for the fan. Ground wire I'm going to cut short. They had it running all the way in the cab. Looks like the switch controlled the grounds and not the hot wires. But let me show you what I did. So here we have the ground wire just going to a bolt on the chassis here. Nice and simple. The hot wire comes out here, and I haven't decided if I'm just going to make a piece that plugs into it or what I want to do. I might just make a quick little bloop and plug it into here. That way I don't have to reinvent the wheel. We got the ground done. Now we're hooking up a 14 gauge orange wire, solder this together, put heat shrink over it, and we have our fan wiring buttoned up. We just need to run the power wires still under the dash. And this will go to the off-road lights. Hopped inside the Bronco. We're going to go ahead and start taking the trim panel off, and then we can start running wires into here. Currently looks like just a bunch of wires running under the dash, but these all go through a grommet of the firewall, and then we're going to run them, get up in here to where this orange wire is coming out here. It all makes sense once we're done. I still have that ground wire left over from the previous owner for the fan switch. I'm going to use it as good ground. We'll run that up here and wire up our switches accordingly. Now under the hood, we just have a mess of wiring. All this will get cleaned up and then covered in tubing. I ran out of convoluted tubing, not enough to do the job. So I zip tied it all clean and tight, and we'll just zip tie it up and out of the way for now. But it's turned out good so far. We'll need to focus on getting our switches mounted, and then we can focus on wiring up the dash. Here you can see what the switches are going to look like. 1/2-inch hole, and just a simple 30 amp toggle switch. We have our two switches mounted. Two switches are mounted. Now we'll flip this over. And you can see the wiring. What I'm going to do is jumper the grounds together. And then we can connect that to the ground already in the truck. And we'll run our hots how they need to go. With the ground wires done, we're ready to just connect that to the other ground under the dash. We'll have to hook up our load and our output wire, load and output wire, which are already run, so that saves us some time, and already pre-wired under the hood. The only problem is I cracked the dash trim right here, so I have to go get some epoxy and try to fix that before I can go any further and put the dash back together. Alright, so we got the switches mounted to the instrument trim panel. We've got the wires ran into the cab. I went ahead and put spade connectors on them. Let me go ahead and show you that. We're waiting for epoxy to show up so we can epoxy the trim panel. But once this wiring's done inside, then I'll be able to go ahead and do the ground wire for the fuse block, the hot wire for the breaker, and then we can mount our off-road lights. Here's the wires to our switches. Red for the off-road lights, orange for the fan. These supply power to the switches. Now these are the wires that supply power from the switch to the relay, just both in white. It doesn't matter which relay gets excited or which relay goes to what accessory. And then I have my ground wire. That way we can use the indicator lights on the switches so we know when the switches are on. Here I have some 3/4 inch masking tape we're using to hold the trim panel together. I'll be using some JB clear weld to epoxy the back of the panel. Using a little stir stick, I smoothed it over the crack, and the tape also helps prevent it from flowing through the crack into the front of the trim panel. Well, we have the trim panel all epoxied. The rubber trim is back in place. Wires are ready to plug in. The center wire here will be our load out, so that'll be the white relay wire. The load in will be red or orange, depending on what the switch is for. This switch will be for the fan, and this one will be for the off-road lights. We'll get this situated. Hopefully the epoxy holds up, and we can plug and play everything. Here you can see the wiring. Red is in, white is out, orange is in, white is out, and then black is my ground. So we should be able to snap this back in place and secure the trim panel. Then we can go under the front and button up the ground and hot to the relays, or the fuse block, I mean. Alright, so the trim panel is sitting back in place. Now we can tighten down our Torx bits. Nice and snug. We can put our trim panels back on and secure the headlight knob. Now with the dash in, we can't forget to remove the tape. That added some security while we were putting on the epoxy. And you can still see the crack, but it's not the end of the world. It's at least held together and won't come apart again. There. I can always scuff this up later and try to hide it a little better. Now let's get underneath the hood. With the dash wiring done, we've got to make this ground wire for the fuse block. So I've got a grounding stud here. We're just going to mock it up and take it down to here, and then we'll trim this to fit, and we'll put a new lug on it. Ground wire is grounded. Now I've got to do the hot wire to the battery. It's going to be the same process. Measure it, cut it, and then put a lug on it. Okay, so we have the holes drilled in the bumper. We're going to get our lights mounted. We have to run a wire back to the relay. Everything else is done. I have a wire already put together, and I'll show you what I did and why I did it. So let's get to that. One of the last things to do is wire up these worn 6-inch 55 watt halogen lights. They've got that old school 90s vibe. They're going to go right on the bumper. What we're doing is 2 holes, 1/2-inch holes, put these down, bolt them in, crank them down, and then just run hot wire. One of the last things to do is to drill these holes for some 55 watt halogen worn off-road lights. They're just going to sit up front, kind of old school, and then we can solder that wire in to the red wire under here, and everything should function as needed. So the worn lights only have a hot wire. They use the bolts as a ground. So that being said, I soldered a single wire to a 2-wire plug. That way I can just plug and play it, and then we'll run this back here to our relay. Well, wiring's ran. We need to zip tie it up and clean it up, but it's going all the way up to the fuse block and relay setup. Now we can go ahead and take our worn 6-inch lights and finish installing them here in these holes. So let me get my camera set up and I'll go ahead and show you guys how they go down. Off-road lights are wired up. We still have to aim them. We'll tighten them up for now so that way we know we have a good ground. And then we put our fuses in under the hood and we should be able to test fire it. Fuses are in. Lights are secure. We should be able to hit the fan switch now and the lights and everything should come on. So this light switch should be our off-road lights and this one should be our fan. Now we can hear the fan running. Let's see if the lights are working. Sweet. Fuse cover is on. Looks pretty clean. I know we need some convoluted tubing, but we'll get to all that. I'll have to order some. But all in all, not a bad turnout. Once we get some tubing, all this will be cleaned up and looking pretty. I think it turned out pretty sweet.
Done.
As I said, I apologize for the sporadic video. There's a bunch of here and there. Trying to get the wiring done kind of required a lot of time and not a lot of space for cameras. We got it all buttoned up. I do have to get some convoluted tubing still, clean up the wire, finish up the wiring under the hood, and then finish up some of the underdash stuff. But for now, the fan works, the lights work, we're pretty squared away. If you guys like what you saw, click the like and subscribe button. Thanks again for watching. God bless and take care.